So picture this. It's a seemingly routine day over the cold, gray waters of the Norwegian Sea. A standard patrol, a familiar flight path, or so they thought. Because this particular patrol, well, it was about to become the textbook example of 21st century air combat. A silent, invisible hunt that would completely rewrite the rules of the game. You know, that line right there, it just gets right to the heart of what we're talking about today. It's that terrifying moment when you realize the very technology you trust to keep you alive, well, it's not just failing you, it's totally blind to the predator that's been stalking you for miles. So here's how we're going to break this all down. Think of it like an aerial chess match, move by move. We'll start with the hunt begins, then we'll look at the invisible predator. After that, we'll get into the spooky stuff with a ghost in the machine and electronic ghosts. Then we'll see the intelligence goldmine they stumbled upon, and finally we'll cover the long walk home. All right, Chapter 1, the hunt begins. This is where we set the stage, the first calculated move in a high-stakes game playing out over the Arctic. Okay, so things kick off fast. At 0847, you've got 4 Russian nuclear-capable bombers. We're talking the Tu-95 Bears, and their fighter escorts popping up over the Norwegian Sea. Just 4 minutes later, the scramble order is out. And by 0855, get this, only 8 minutes after they were first spotted, 2 Norwegian F-35s are already in the air punching into that Arctic sky. I mean, that is an unbelievably fast response. Now, right off the bat, the Norwegian pilots make a huge tactical call. They could have gone head-on, right? That's the fastest way. But look at the difference. The head-on approach gives you maybe 20 seconds of contact time. That's it. Instead, they chose the stern approach. Slower, yeah, but it gave them a full 5 minutes to just sit back and watch before anyone even had a clue they were there. They basically traded a little bit of time for a massive strategic upper hand. And here's the genius of it. The Russian radar, powerful as it is kind of like having eyes only in the front of your head. It's got this huge 120-degree cone it scans in front, but it's completely blind from behind. That 6 o'clock position, it's a total blind spot. And that's exactly where the F-35s decided to set up shop. So by coming in from behind and, crucially, from above, the Norwegians grabbed what pilots call the perch. And you have to understand, this is the ultimate position of dominance. From up there, altitude is just stored energy. If the Russians tried to dive away, the F-35s could just trade that height for speed and catch them, no problem. If they climbed, well, they'd just slow down and become an even easier target. They were trapped, and they didn't even know it. All right, Chapter 2, the invisible predator. So they've got this perfect tactical position. Now it's all about using the real magic of a 5th-gen fighter, seen without being seen. So at 9:03 in the morning, the F-35s are sitting pretty. Just look at this. 80 kilometers back, 3,000 meters up. And the crazy part? They are totally, completely invisible. Their computers are already crunching the numbers, building perfect firing solutions, while the Russian crews are probably just sipping coffee, thinking this is just another boring patrol. They have no idea they're being hunted. So you're probably asking, wait, how can they see them without turning on their radar? The answer is this incredible piece of tech called the Distributed Aperture System, or DAS. It's not radar at all. It's basically 6 high-def infrared cameras dotted all over the plane. A supercomputer stitches all those feeds together into a perfect 360-degree bubble of vision and projects it right inside the pilot's helmet. They were tracking those bombers from 200 kilometers away without making a single electronic peep. What this does is create something pilots call a glass cockpit. I mean, the pilot can literally look down right through the floor of their own jet and see the ground, or look back through their own engine and see what's behind them. The plane itself becomes transparent. It's like the difference between peeking through a keyhole versus standing in the room made entirely of glass. And against that freezing Arctic sky, those Tu-95 bombers were practically screaming their location. I mean, you've got an air temperature of minus 30 Celsius, and their engines are burning at 400 degrees. That massive 430-degree difference in temperature basically turns each bomber into a flying bonfire for an infrared system like DAS. They were impossible to miss. And it gets even better, because there are 2 F-35s, they're looking at the Russian planes from slightly different angles. So you have a total of 12 infrared eyes on the target. They link up their systems, and all 12 of those video feeds get fused into one single, super accurate 3D picture of what's going on. And remember, they're doing all of this without making a sound, electronically speaking. Okay, Chapter 3, a ghost in the machine.
Now, I want you to put yourself in the cockpit of one of those Russian escort fighters. Your screens are totally blank. Your warning systems are quiet. But you feel it in your gut. Something is wrong. This is about that feeling. Look, these weren't rookies. These guys had thousands of hours in the air. 60 years of Soviet pilot instincts were just screaming at them that they weren't alone. But every single dial, every screen, every piece of gear in that cockpit was telling them the sky was empty. Their gut was right. Their multi-million-dollar technology was dead wrong.
So this raises a really interesting question, right? If you're the Norwegian pilot, you have complete control. So how do you announce your presence? How do you let them know you've got them without giving away where you are? The answer? 2 seconds. That's it. For just 2 seconds, the lead F-35 flashes its radar. And in those Russian cockpits, all hell breaks loose. Sirens, flashing lights, it's the unmistakable sound of a missile lock. And then, gone. Absolute silence again. How on earth is that possible? Well, an old-school radar is like a lighthouse. It's a big dish that has to physically sweep back and forth. It's slow, and it's easy to see where it's coming from. The F-35's ASA radar is totally different. It's a flat plate with over 1,000 tiny transmitters. It can aim its beam electronically at the speed of light. So it can just zap a target, get all the data it needs, range, speed, heading, and then shut off before the enemy can even figure out where that zap came from. Of course, the Russian pilots whip around and start blasting the sky with their own powerful radars. But look at this comparison. Their radar was built to find things like a 100,000-ton aircraft carrier. The F-35 has the radar signature of a golf ball. Seriously, a golf ball. Asking that Russian radar to find the F-35 was like trying to find one specific bird in a flock of thousands, at night, in a storm. It just wasn't going to happen. And now we get to Chapter 4, Electronic Ghosts. This is where things get really wild. The F-35s stop being passive observers and become active puppet masters. They're about to turn the Russian formation's own defenses into its worst enemy. And this is the tool they used to do it, the AN/ASQ-239 Barracuda. While all that Russian radar energy was flying around, the Barracuda was just listening. Think of it like a spy, silently taking notes on every single frequency, every pulse, every reaction. It was building a complete electronic dossier on the enemy in real time. Okay, so after all that electronic cat and mouse, it was time for the big reveal. The F-35s do this cool maneuver, dropping down from behind and above, always staying in that blind spot. And after 11 minutes of being completely invisible, they just appear. 500 meters off the bomber's wing. For the Russian crew, it must have been like seeing a ghost phase through a solid wall. And just when you think it's over, the Norwegians decide to really mess with them. They go electronically silent again. And what happens next is just pure chaos. For 43 seconds, the Russian formation literally fought against itself. And let me be clear, this wasn't some fluke. This was chaos by design. Look at how it works. The F-35s disappear, the Russian systems freak out and start seeing their own friendly jamming signals as a threat. One of the Su-33s actually locks its own bomber. The pilot has to manually break it off. Then, the jamming pods on one plane start triggering the warning systems on the other planes. It was a total cascading failure, a textbook case of electronic fratricide, all engineered by the F-35s. All right, Chapter 5, the intelligence goldmine. The high-drama part of the Intercept might be done, but for NATO, the real prize was still to come. Because this mission was about to go from a simple failure for the Russians to an absolute intelligence catastrophe. For the rest of the flight, those F-35s turned into flying vacuum cleaners for intelligence. They sucked up everything, every single radar mode the Tu-95 used, the exact heat signatures of the engines at different altitudes, the frequencies and power levels of their jamming pods. They even timed how long it took the Su-33 escorts to react. This stuff is gold. It goes straight into NATO's databases to make these planes even easier to beat next time. But the biggest score of the day? It was a total accident. In their panic, trying to find the F-35s, the Russian pilots ran through every single mode their radar had, and in doing so, they accidentally showed off a brand new, top-secret frequency-hopping pattern, something NATO had never seen before. They literally gave away one of their biggest secrets. And that one little mistake, it came with a massive price tag. We're talking $2.3 billion. That's because that exact same tech was the key feature in a huge weapons deal Russia was trying to close with Iran. So on one routine patrol, they not only compromised a multi-billion-dollar deal, they basically handed over their latest and greatest EW tech for free.
And that brings us to our final chapter, the long walk home. The Russian planes finally turn around, but NATO isn't quite done with them yet. This last part isn't about fighting. It's about sending a message, a psychological power play.
So as the F-35s are escorting them out, they start calling in their friends. First, a couple of Danish F-16s show up. Then, a little later, a British Typhoon casually rolls in from the west. All of a sudden, the Russians are being escorted by this 5-plane NATO honor guard that they definitely did not ask for. It was a very clear, very public message.
And this was no friendly escort. The Danish pilots pulled a move called an aggressive escort. They held a hard radar lock on the Russian bombers for 40 straight minutes. Can you imagine that? For 40 minutes, a piercing alarm is screaming in your ears, telling you a missile could be coming at any second. It is an incredible amount of psychological stress to put on a flight crew. The Russian escorts, the Su-33s, they tried to get in the way, tried to screen their bombers, but it was just useless. Every time they made a move, NATO had a counter. They'd bank left, an F-35 would be waiting. They'd climb, a Typhoon would be right there. It really was like this quote says. The Russians were playing checkers, and NATO was playing 4D chess.
Finally, when they got to the edge of Russian airspace, the NATO jets peeled off. And as each one left, the pilot gave a little wing waggle. It's a universal sign for pilots, kind of like a wave. It means, see you later. But in this situation, it was the final, polite, but absolutely unmistakable statement of complete and total dominance. So that leaves us with one last thought. The whole thing played out over hours, with almost no words spoken. It was all electronic signals and careful maneuvering. So in that silent language of the sky, what was the real message that got sent that day? I think it was a clear message about a new era of air combat. An era where seeing without being seen turns a simple patrol into the perfect hunt.